of course, was in many ways a severe blow for whatever remained of the fragile democratic order of Turkey. Now we are in the midst of a very sort of a follow-up, a dramatic conclusion, resolution of that process with vast consequences of purge. Again, cruelty unimaginable to targeting our profession, and with an unknown series of consequences. No matter if yes or no vote wins next Sunday's 16th of April referendum. And we are going to discuss the dimension of where we are, because in many ways, what happened in Turkey as a sort of laboratorium of rapidly emerging authoritarianism in the world is exemplary of what is to come and what is to expect in other parts of the world. It has always been like that in the past 4 or 5 years. And here I am together with 3 distinguished guests, colleagues of mine, to discuss various dimensions of that. And I will give each and every one of them like 8 minutes to introduce those dimensions. And we will follow up with the Q&A with your questions about that. And I'll begin introducing the gentleman on my right, Efe Kerem Sözeri. And he wants to be introduced only like a freelance journalist, but he's an academician as well. That's a secret that I want to share with you. And he's based in Amsterdam for a long time, and following keenly the situation in Turkey on hourly basis, minute basis actually. And on my left, freshly arrived from Turkey with the latest updates, my young colleague Gülsin Harman, whom I've known for a long time, currently with the International Press Institute, Turkish office. Damaged Turkish office, I would say, because one of our dearest friends, whom I've known for over 3 decades, the head of the IPI Turkey, also part of the executive board of the International Press Institute, Kadri Gürsel, has been incarcerated for more than 152 days. He was here in Umbria, Journalism Festival last year, if I'm not mistaken, but he's now behind bars. And finally, Marta Ottaviani, my dear colleague, who is the author of Il Reis, a portrait of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkish president. Of course, a moving target. This book may be needing a lot of powerful updates in about 6 months, I don't know. And Marta, welcome also. We'll begin with Gülsin, because Gülsin will, I suppose, speak more about conventional media and what happened to, in various dimensions, to the conventional media, and what is the latest, which will be followed up by Marta, who will be giving you the snapshots of what's been happening recently with the foreign press in Turkey. And Efe will conclude with what's been happening with the social media, new media, oppression on that. So, Gülsin, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Yavuz. So first, I would like to state with a suggestion. I would like to propose a twist on the name of the panel. Instead of black hole, I would suggest to use the word limbo. Turkey now is a big black limbo for the journalists, both international and Turkish journalists. I'm saying a limbo, and I want to make my case with a very concrete example. Exactly a year ago, Kadri Gürsel, that Yavuz so kindly mentioned, he was on this table. He made a speech about the current state of the Turkish journalism, and by describing it, he said, they are not killing journalists anymore, a reference to the 90s, but they are killing journalism. So, where is he now? One may tell you that he is in prison for more than 152 days. His indictment is out only 2 days ago, with completely bogus claims and absurd charges. But the fact that he is in prison, I would interpret this as he's been in limbo. Because as his case is purely political, his release and the further implications on his case depend totally on the political circumstances in Turkey. So a few months ago, he gave a quote through his wife to New York Times, because his wife is the only person allowed to see him so far. And he said this: "I am a captive hostage for the upcoming presidential referendum." Because the voice of a very celebrated public intellectual in Turkey, as he is, has been shut down. An effective critic is silenced through imprisonment. And the reason is, the main reason that they wanted to get rid of his voice, because he was a very important critic of the government and a very wise critic of the government and his policies. So I would suggest that to keeping it all on with the illusion of a limbo. So now in Turkey, more and more, you don't know what is a crime. And for journalists, it's much more important. For example, making a critical comment on social media or even sharing a cartoon, is it a crime? You can ask this question to 10,000 people who are currently under investigation in Turkey for their posts on social media. Or standing on this panel, is it a crime? I think that maybe I will find out when I'm back to Turkey. Maybe tarnishing Turkey's image abroad will constitute a crime for me. For example, working in international media while being a Turkish citizen, is it a crime? You can ask this question to numerous Turkish journalists who are working for international outlets, and each day being a target of ferocious online campaign by state-sponsored actors. So many cases of limbo, so many cases of without knowing what is a crime, what is not anymore. So if you are a journalist in Turkey, you can have, I would say, categorize it in five ways. So either you are in jail, you are imprisoned, and international organizations put the figure around 150 journalists in jail. Either you are jobless. The Venice Commission report put the number up to 2,500. This is only the number of the journalists who went jobless after the failed coup d'etat. So on midnight, emergency law decrees are published, and you can suddenly find out that your news organization has been shut down, it's liquidated, and you are jobless now. So this is a limbo for you. You don't know it if you have the job the morning you wake up. So the third way, self-censorship. And this is the most sinister way, and this is I would say, the most useful weapon. Also, the very sinister weapon used against Turkish journalists. Impossible to fight back because you internalize it so much that at the end of the day, it's just a part of you. And sometimes you just really want to fight it back, but the means are really limited because it's became a very important of your mindset. The fourth, like I mentioned, or you can be a Turkish citizen who have the chance to work in international media, doing decent journalism, but then you get framed by trolls, by even volunteer citizens as a traitor, as someone who is doing everything to tarnish Turkey's image. Or the fifth case, maybe you can be a decent journalist working for independent media, but overwhelmed with trials and investigation. So having said all of this, I insist to remain on a hopeful tone. The Guardian published an editorial back in January, and it concludes a very loved sentence by me. It is easy to see the despot in Turkey, but the millions of citizens with all diversity, all their aspirations, remain to be seen also. I want to ensure you that, and coming from Turkey, Istanbul, so many journalists remain defined. And independent media is also looking staunchly for new ways to manifest. For example, I would just give a very small anecdote. A lot of journalists in Turkey currently in jail, they are not allowed to receive even postcards. So on the recent New Year's Eve, we wanted to just give our best wishes to imprisoned colleagues. but we were not able to. So we get together as a part of the Solidarity Group, Turkey Journals in Turkey Solidarity Group. We get together with the willing other colleagues in a warehouse, took a photo, and published it on the page ones of some news outlets, some newspapers who accepted this. And by doing this, we were able to send our regards to our imprisoned colleagues. For example, there's a story of the website, the independent news website, sendika.org. They have been shut down, they have been blocked. They have been blocked 19 times. Each time they are changing the URL. And with a great sense of humor, they are keeping their good work. So, and on a very final note, and back to panel's promise, what are the lessons that can be drawn for international colleagues dealing with populism and rising authoritarian trends? I would suggest, and having been an avid watcher of the US right now and some European countries also, do not let them normalize things. Object from the very beginning and always underline what is not normal, what is not acceptable, unlawful, unconstitutional. Secondly, I would say always tell your audience that the journalism is done for the sake of the public opinion. When a journalist, an institution, or a news outlet is attacked, it is your very right to information that is under attack. So when a journalist is imprisoned, of course, it's his or her right to be free also is denied. But your very right to information also is denied. The journalism is not a pure elite thing to do. The journalist exists for you and the job is done for you. And for example, this is a mistake that very regretfully we had in Turkey. As a major flaw, we were not able to convince the Turkish public opinion to support us in the very ordeal dating back like a decade ago. Another mistake, very honestly, that we made, that the solidarity between Turkish journalists, Kurdish journalists, all the journalists operating in Turkey came really late. So I would suggest that focus on what unites you. Do not permit the power circles to manipulate old adversaries or to work to the benefit of polarization. And on a final note, I would suggest take your vitamins regularly because it is exhausting to fight back. Thank you.
A nightmarish picture indeed, but put it into context not only of the media but with the judiciary and the media together, because this authoritarianist tsunami is targeting the third estate and the fourth estate together, and the current situation is practically a non-existent absence of rule of law as we know it. Nullification of rule of law in today's Turkey. Just the latest example is like for 4 days ago, as the indictments of the groups of journalists are now rolling in the machinery coming to the courts. The first group of journalists, which were about 21, after the hearing, prosecutor, surprisingly to us, asked for release of 8 of them. But the judge went even further and decided that 7 more would be released as well. So we ended up in 15 journalists being released as a decision. And this, of course, caused a wave of joy. That night, families, relatives, sons, daughters, children waiting at the gates of the prison. That was a Friday night, if I'm not mistaken. Late midnight, suddenly the gates were closed by the gendarmerie and police, and nobody understood what was going on. The news broke later on, to the shock of the families, that all of them would be rearrested by a new order. So they went out of the prison. According to the Turkish procedures, they were arrested not to be taken back to the prison, but to the police custody again, under the state of emergency, which is sort of a nightmare, deepening nightmare, because police custody has even worse conditions than the prison. And you can imagine the tragedy that those families are affected by. And then Gülsin mentioned some figures, 150. It varies from 1 to 1, but according to let's say in average, it's somewhere between 150 and 166, the latest figure I heard. And this figure, let's say if it's 150 even, corresponds to approximately 62% of the total number of jailed journalists on this planet. 62%, almost 2/3 of jailed journalists in the world are now in Turkish prisons. This is the highest number ever registered, ever since the monitoring of jailed journalists began in the history. So this is to be noted. Secondly, I would say, just to pass the word, before passing the word to Marta, out of regional, national, or local 245 TV channels in Turkey, there is only 1.5 channels able to report critically these days. The one is the main opposition channel, Halk TV, very tiny, frail financially, and Fox TV, paradoxically owned by Murdoch, is the one that has found a niche of being critical. And in print, which is a very weak now part of the media, out of 40 national newspapers, only 4 tiny newspapers with low circulations. Cumhuriyet, 30,000. Bir Gün and Evrensel on the left flank, each 3,000, 4,000. And on the right flank, another critical ultranationalist newspaper, Yeni Çağ, which is about 9,000 according to latest figures. The rest is gone. It's up to 95% of the Turkish media is now either directly or indirectly under the control of the government. It is as tragic figure as the one in Azerbaijan or in Central Asian republics. But now we are going to talk about what's happening with the foreign correspondence based mainly in Istanbul, but also in Ankara and Diyarbakir. Marta.
Thank you, Yavuz. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to this so meaningful panel. My name is Marta Ottaviani. I work as a journalist mainly for La Stampa ed Avvenire. Since 2003 till 2013, I lived in Turkey, so I had the opportunity to experience, to follow the political of the power of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and unfortunately also the deterioration of democracy in Turkey. Actually, I have to tell that it has never been easy being a journalist in Turkey, even as a foreign correspondent. But still, till 2013, we were not afraid. Now we are starting of being afraid, because especially after the so-called coup of last July, everything changed. And now foreign journalists have especially 2 kinds of problems. The first one is with the authorities. We know that there is a Turkish-German journalist, Deniz Yücel, who is in jail since 1.5 months, if I remember well. And recently, Recep Tayyip Erdogan told that he is very happy to know that Deniz Yücel is in jail. And with the charge of terrorism, one of the point I think we have underlined most is that most of the journalists in jail now are not charged with crimes related to the journalistic job. They are charged with terrorism or terrorist propaganda, which is something really unbelievable. And there was also a reporter for New York Times, Rod Nordstrom, who was rejected at the passport control, and an Italian lawyer, Barbara Spinelli, had the same fate, if I remember well, 2 days later. And frankly speaking, I don't know if I will be able to enter the country next week, because the situation is getting worse and worse. Of course, I really hope I will be able to, and I'm quite optimistic about that. But it is nothing you can be sure about now, absolutely. And also, having the press card renewed has become more and more difficult. They are making troubles. They do not give the press card to people working for website, for example, even if they are information website like the one you can find in Italy, in Turkey, everywhere. And also, there were were reported several cases of foreign correspondents questioned by the police. In the meantime, they were filming in the middle of the street, general pictures, I mean general shootings. And also the biggest problem, and I really want to underline this point because it is the most important one to me, the problem is that people changed. The attitude of Turkish people changed towards a foreign correspondent. And if the government changes, if the attitude to the power and to the democracy of Recep Tayyip Erdogan changes, of course, it's a serious problem. But if people start to change, that is the worst problem, because that means that now you are in an ideological dictatorship. And I think that this is what is happening, unfortunately, now in Turkey. For example, before people were only, when I came to Turkey, people were generally very suspicious towards foreign journalists, but now they became angry. When I interview people in the street or I talk to people I was used to talk regularly when I lived in Turkey, they are very angry with Europe. And I think that this is the result of the message Erdogan is delivering since 2013. So a very strong message against the European Union, against the West, and against Western people in general. And it is something very dangerous for the internal stability of Turkey and for the stability of the Mediterranean region. And a demonstration was the attack Erdogan made against the Dutch and the German government in the last month. Of course, there was an electoral purpose because the anti-EU feeling now is a powerful weapon in order to win the referendum. But I think there is also an ideological component. I mean, the aim of Erdogan is a very divisive person, and I think that his last aim is really put Turkish people against European people. This is my personal opinion. Coming back to the topic, after the coup, a lot of shop owners became informer for the police. We have, as a foreign correspondent, we had several cases in which we went to a shop owner just to make a few questions, and they called the police immediately, or the police was already there, almost waiting for us. Making an interview has become really difficult, even with people you were used to talk since a lot of years. And we know that police is monitoring not only our mobile phone, not only our Twitter and Facebook account, but also our movements when we are in Istanbul. And also, for example, my Twitter account was hacked, if I remember well, 5 times in 10 days last October. So, and the hacker... Yes. And to conclude, the point is that it's painful for me. Look at the place I loved so much, changing so rapidly, and really seems that there is no solution to this change. And as a foreign correspondent, to conclude now, we feel treated like an enemy and or at least an inconvenience, and it is something we are quite afraid for. Of course, we go on in doing our job, and it won't be Erdogan or the police or a shop owner to stop us. But it became more and more difficult also because there are people on the social media, but also in generally on the web, who are trying to say that we are writing the false. So, I mean, there will be on Sunday an interview on the post-truth. I think that what is risking now Turkey is become a victim of a very big post-truth. And that's it.
Yes, thanks to International Journalism Festival, we could actually, in the past 4 years, give you a barometer of what's been taking place in Turkey. And each year, followers of this subject here, participants, listeners, could note how the gloom is now reaching the top. And this was sort of something that we saw happening and as inevitable. And these latest narratives are also just coming as confirmation of that. And perhaps Efe has something to lighten us up on this subject.
I will even make it more darker. I have some figures because I have prepared some data as well. Yes, thank you very much. You can reach always this data from my Twitter feed. I am Efe Kerem over here. So you can click on these links and you can go to all the data itself. So in case you miss any numbers, it's all okay. Okay, can you still see this? Okay, well, I cannot make it more bigger. Yeah, this one will go with F11. Oh, kind of better? All right. I was here 2 years ago and to present my data from Twitter censorship. This is what I do. I study Twitter censorship and censorship in general in Turkey. I use Twitter data basically to take snapshots, like 6 months snapshots of Turkey, and I treat the Twitter transparency reports kind of a report of Turkey. So the decline in Turkish freedom of expression. So this is what I showed in 2015. It was about a year after Twitter was blocked nationwide. It was right before the local elections, March 2014 elections. Erdogan blocked Twitter and then forced Twitter to use a different tool called country withheld tool. So it basically blocks certain content in a certain country. In our case, it's Turkey. And for the 2014 part, it was mainly about corruption, because right before the local elections, certain groups within the police department started to leak evidence of the corruption investigation on Erdogan, his family, and his cabinet. So these evidences were spreading around Twitter, so they decided to shut down Twitter and then force Twitter to, censor this information to reach the public. So this is what I showed, like a small little figure. This is where we are now after two more years. So 3 years of Twitter censorship with lots of numbers. You can just directly go to Twitter page, Twitter transparency report, and go to this. Let's take a summary of these. Well, there are even 5-digit numbers. So let's take a summary of this, like a very small summary. In 2014, well, the end of 2014, we had some 80 accounts withheld, about 2,000 tweets withheld. By the end of 3 years, we have about 2,000 accounts withheld or suspended in Turkey. I will mention how they are suspended by the TOS as well. And, well, about 9,000 tweets censored too. So it's a growing number. But how Turkey is making these numbers even larger and larger each year is the story of Turkey's decline, this black hole for journalists as well, because they are using Twitter to reach out to the public, because all the other channels are blocked. Okay. So this is how Turkey is different from the rest of the world. The red part is Turkey, and the blue part is the rest of the world. So as the number of Twitter users, Twitter content tweets increase, of course there are more complaints, and some governments also take the trend towards more, authoritarian, and there's an increase for the blue part as well. But you cannot normally explain Turkey's sudden increase from 2015 onwards as a general trend. It's something different. So this is the number of requests made about any account. So in Turkish case, for example, in the last part where it peaked over there, it was about 23,000 accounts. So the government was complaining about 23,000 people using Twitter. And these little donuts show how much Turkey is censoring accounts compared to the rest of the world. So as you see, it's even at certain times it was even like around 75%. So 3/4 of all world's Twitter censorship was made by Twitter. Especially in 2015 second half, it was even bigger, going to 92%, almost like like 9 times of the rest of the world. Censorship was made by Turkey. But how Turkey does it? I mean, of course they block Twitter altogether, and tomorrow there will be a session. There will be experts to explain how they are also throttling the connection to have the access to be blocked efficiently for the masses. But actually, Turkey is doing something very efficient in its Twitter censorship, and that is the decline of the rule of law. Okay, can we? Okay, this one. So compared to the rest of the world, Turkey is sending about 15 more times of court orders to Twitter. Court order is the most efficient way of censoring content, because in other cases, when there's a user complaint or when there's a law enforcement complaint, these can be challenged. But when it is the law in a country, Twitter has very limited ways to challenge this. And in the first year, they were challenging about 35–40% of the court cases by their lawyers. Twitter hired a lawyer team in Turkey, so they were challenging this in the upper courts, and they were winning some. They were able to, when there were like about 100 accounts were censored, they were about to win some 5–6% of them in the upper courts. Well, in Turkish case, that's still something. This number, the succession to appeal the Turkish court orders in the upper court, started to decline each new period of Twitter transparency reports. And in the final report that was published about a month ago, it was 0. So none of the censorship orders given by the government, I will explain how this also goes, could be challenged in the Turkish law. So basically, this also shows how the rule of law is completely gone in Turkey. So basically, how Twitter censorship in Turkey is done is through the law, and this is actually more like an executive order. So basically, there's an office under the Prime Minister's office, security directorate it is called, and then they are sending lists to a certain court in Ankara, the capital, which is responsible for the judicial review of these censorship orders. But it is more like a rubber stamp, actually, a rubber stamp court. They are just like approving all the lists, all the blacklists, if you like to say, that the government wishes to censor. And when this is a court order, and when it cannot be challenged by the local appeal process, then Twitter is kind of forced to do this. But there is one more means given to the authoritative regimes, including Turkey and Russia too. So this blue part now, again, the rest of the world, is similar to the Turkish trend, and it is caused by the Russia. So both of these countries this is kind of internal part, but Twitter again bow down to another form of censorship, and that is by terms of service complaints by the law enforcement. So they opened a new channel for the law enforcement organizations of countries. Turkey and Russia uses this as high as this, as you can see. And they are saying that these content, in Turkish case, it is the terror propaganda. They claim that this is terror propaganda. They are glorifying violence, and therefore, please shut this down. And of course, as Yavuz told, this is. I'm trying to, monitor all this process very closely, and I know, at least part of these accounts that were claimed to be against the Twitter's rules are actually just the Kurdish activists just protesting that they, the leader of the Kurdish movement, the co-chairs of the Kurdish movement are in jail. About 11 members of the parliament were also taken into jail back in November. So basically, they were Kurdish activists protesting this. But unfortunately, once you bow down to censorship, it continues and continues. And this is the story of Turkey. an overly authoritarian regime using all the tools to make all the amendments necessary in the law to make it possible for a government to rule as it pleases, and then also uses rule of law to continue its pressure, using it as a tool. To their credit, Twitter sent their representatives to European Chair of Representatives to Turkey to meet with journalists back in 2015. And they kind of made a deal together, to say that we will try to do our best to protect journalists in Turkey, because journalists are using Twitter to spread out the news, actually, for your very own right to information. So there was this deal. But what happened after the coup back in this summer? Twitter bowed down one more time, and this was an important principle. I think this is to the concern of all of you in this room, and if they are watching, to all of the people interested in journalism in the world. Twitter censored verified journalist accounts in Turkey. It included two Kurdish news agencies, ANF and DİHA, their official Twitter accounts. It included Kurdish Daily, it's a long-term Kurdish Daily, Özgür Gündem, its account. Today's Zaman, one of the leading English language dailies in Turkey. Its editor-in-chief and most of its editors. And remaining of the Zaman and Zaman Daily and Today's Daily and Zaman America. So Zaman's, all of their branches, reporters, editors, and so. These are verified accounts, so Twitter knows that they are journalists, but in the end, they censored it based on Turkey's request. On the Twitter transparency report, they say that this is based on a Turkish National Security Council decision, but as you know how Turkey goes, it's basically an Erdogan decision. So this is very concerning, and I think all of you should take a note of how Twitter, how Facebook and Google too, I'm only presenting the Turkey Twitter part here, is bowing down to this. On a lighter note? Okay, the lighter note is this. So many journalists taken into jail, many journalists are losing their jobs. So some journalists, some of them also among the unemployed, got together, took an initiative last year because there was a going PKK conflict. They got together and they went to the southeast of Turkey. They said that we will take risks, but we will go on our own budget, stay there for about a week, support with our colleagues there, and report from the region. And they started what is called a haber nöbeti. Haber nöbeti in Turkish, it's called news watch. So as if they are taking the watch, take it from each other, taking the vigil from each other. They went there to report. It went on for about 2 or 3 months, I guess, and they did great reporting. You can, by the way, click any of these orange-colored things on the presentation, so you can go to the sources. And now it is they have two Twitter accounts. One of them is Ben Gazeteciyim, it's in Turkish. Second one is Journos in Turkey. I just took a screenshot from one of their recent tweets. So this is what they do. They are still a collective, so they are not one account to target easily. If one of them is jailed, then the second one takes the turn. So on a lighter note, this is how they use Twitter, and this is why global companies is also important for us to report. So this is what I do. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have about 15 minutes for questions and answers, and we will end with a 3 minutes specific section at the end. But please make your questions short, because we should give as many questions as possible, and to whom you are addressing the question. Yes?
Actually, I have 2 questions, but anybody who wishes to answer is free. So the first one is about in Erdogan's support by his people. I mentioned before the hate versus foreign reporters, but I saw last rally, maybe it was the last one, on TV, and actually I saw a lot of people supporting him. So how do you explain this? Is about his rhetoric about nationalism, talking about enemies everywhere. Once Russia, once the United States, once Europe, once the terrorists, and the second one is about the coup. It was difficult to get the real or the most trustable version. Maybe your colleagues knows there's an Italian, not actually newspaper, but a magazine, which is called Limes, Borders, and it talks about geopolitics. And they try to explain that as
let's take the question, because we are running out of time. We got your pictures and the questions, and maybe Marta can start giving.
Okay. It was about the role of Gulen and what is true, what is false.
You're wondering about the background of the coup. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, let's say that. Let's say that about the coup there are still more questions and really just a few answers. So, seems that officially a small part of the army staged the coup, and this part is linked to Fethullah Gulen, the so-called first enemy of Turkey. But it is important to underline that till 2010, Fethullah Gulen was the first ally of Erdogan. And then they started to fight each other in order to get the full control of the country. And secondly, another important thing is that this week there was an important update because from Germany, a German journalist told that according to some research in NATO or European Union, Erdogan was behind the coup. And this is for sure a confidant done with the chief of the Secret Service, the very powerful MIT, told that he knew about the coup since 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So at least the right hand of Erdogan was fully informed about what was going to happen. That's why it is quite suspicious what happened that night. And of course, with 3,000, if I remember well, judges and prosecutors in jail, we will never know the truth. At least not in the short time, unfortunately. Regarding Erdogan's support, who wants to answer?
Well, okay, the question is like what makes Erdogan still so supported by the public? Right, this is how I got it. So one thing to keep in mind very sharply that Erdogan has been in power now 15 years. And in 15 years, he was able to build a very powerful machine of propaganda, of understanding, and of the manipulation. But there's also a very important thing to take note about Turkey. That Turkey was not a paradise of democracy beforehand also. So Erdogan took advantage of the deep rifts between the political adversaries, the polarization already a thing. So he took a very good use of the cracks already existing within the political structure and the society. And the 15 years in power gave him enough leverage and time to cement his power.
Okay, thank you. And Marta has something additional to say.
Ok, ho solo una piccola comunicazione dall'organizzazione. Se gentilmente subito dopo la fine del panel potete alzare per una foto tutti i cartelli in modo tale che possa essere scattata una foto e possa essere postata su Twitter con l'hashtag Free Turkey Media. Grazie. Finish?
Okay, any other questions?
Yes.
There are two back there.
My question is one about Erdogan. When he first came to power, he projected an image, at least abroad, of being the Turkish equivalent of the Christian Democrats. He was an Islamic Democrat, and that he believed passionately in secularism. He even, when he taught the Arab world, he kept talking about the importance of secularism. So has he changed, or was he always lying? And my second question is, what can we as journalists do, apart from the hashtag, what can we do to support our colleagues in Turkey?
Okay, I'll save the last question to be answered at last as we close, but let's take the first question.
I will just have one sentence. I never bought it personally. He was always the same. He was just making a face.
I want to add something. Erdogan played the part of the person who wanted to do reforms, but he had an hide Islamic agenda. Regarding the comparison with AKP and Democrazia Cristiana, I had never shared this comparison because in Democrazia Cristiana there were more personalities and different wings in the party, almost equally powerful. In the AKP, then Erdogan, especially after 2011, started to keep the party under a strict control. So I think that the comparison with Democrazia Cristiana is not fully appropriated.
Okay, next, there was another gentleman over there. Please try to make your questions relevant to journalism as much as you can.
It's a short
I know
question.
that politics is deeply into this, but...
My question is, I come originally from a Muslim country. I'm an Italian student. My question is, in all the Muslim countries, Arab countries, there are problems with freedom of journalism. Is religion has an important role? Is it like one of the reasons of less freedom for journalists in the Arab world and in Turkey, even if it's not an Arab country?
Okay, I'll give the word to FF to respond to this 20 million euro question.
May I pass?
You don't want to? Okay, okay.
No, thank you. Please go ahead.
So we keep the question unresponded, but because nobody is prepared to do that. Maybe they think now and give you a response later on. Anybody else? Any other questions?
To all panelists, thank you to be here and thanks for your job, really. I would like to refer to what we said in this morning, what we hear in this morning about the importance of ownership in the media sector. And I would like to ask you, nowadays, what about Turkey? How important is the construction sector on Media's One?
Okay, thank you. Will you give any take on this, Gülsin? Ownership? Well, that's always been the main issue that I take this responsibility to respond this, because I wrote a big paper at Harvard University on ownership in the Turkish media 3 years ago. Now it needs updating, but it was a big paper. And it was arguing that the problems with Turkish democracy, even not only about media, has to do with the ownership structures in Turkish media. And this was a sort of a mechanism that was created almost 3 decades ago, which got more and more corrupted because it was a dirty alliance between whoever came to power and whoever owned large segments of corporate media. And this alliance was based on give and take through big public tenders and contracts. And it has peaked in the end of the 90s, led to a collapse because most of the media proprietors had their own banks. And in a minor scale, what was happening in Italy under Berlusconi would be helpful. But then, under AKP, it got, again, to an extent that there was nothing else left out of an independent ownership of media in Turkey. All dependent. And, of course, that is the heart of the malaise that rotted the media sector itself and made journalists slaves to a self-censorship, which became a culture, which turned the newsrooms into open-air prisons. And we ended up with a genetically modified media, as I call it, as of today. And genetically modified media paves the way for all the other authoritarians in the world, taking the Turkish example as inspiration. That's where I end. But we should continue with other questions. Yes, but if there are any 1 or 2 more questions, we have still time for that.
Okay.
Yes.
Is it possible to find some similarities between what happened a few years ago with the Gezi Park movement and the opposition to the Gezi Park movement in the framework of the first attempt of constitutional reforms, and what's happening now in the framework of the same constitutional reforms and the repression of the opposition in general?
Your question is not clear.
Okay, there's some similarities between the Gezi Park movement in the framework of the first attempt of constitutional reforms and what's happening now with the repression of opposition, journalism, and in general opposition movement, and the attempt to pass with the constitutional reform in Turkey.
The first, I mean, what brought the rule of law to its knees basically was the change in 2010. So it was even earlier than the park. So the park, which I also, well, some of us also took part in, was like a social revolution. I mean, we were looking for our dignity over there. We were fighting for it. So it was more like a social movement. What we have with these constitutional changes are the structural kind of reaction to that, to a government that would take anything that it can use in its tool base and enlarge it with different tools to make sure that not such a thing will not even occur in the first place, so that no people can take the streets in the first place. So this is the change.
Okay, one final question, if there is any. No. Before we have still time. Before we move to Milena. Because we started a little late, so I'm using that extra time. Excuse me? You have one more question? Short one? Promise? Okay.
I'm coming from Croatia. I just wanted to ask you a question about the position of Turkish journalists towards the European Union. Do you feel deserted because one of the conditions for your European perspective was freedom of the media, freedom of speech, human rights, and things like that? Now, when the whole integration process is blocked, do you feel deserted by the European Union?
I think that the very, very short answer to that, the refugee deal with the Turkish government was a Munich moment for Turkish journalists and for Europe also, that to came to an agreement with Turkey on the grounds of the, I would say, even a dirty deal about the refugees had harmed and still continue to harm seriously the cause of the freedom of expression in Turkey. Thank you.
Okay, before we conclude, I give the word to Amnesty International. Milena has something to say, I suppose.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for giving me a little bit of time at the end of the session. I am from Amnesty International. My name is Milena Marin. We wanted to really capitalize on your interest in Turkey and journalism and ask you if you can support our Free Turkey Media campaign. You asked as well what you can do to show solidarity with your journalist friends, and that's what we think is doable. We think that with international pressure we can help the situation, and we've seen that in a previous example with Al Jazeera journalists. If you remember, when the journalists were captured and imprisoned, there was no single Al Jazeera news hour that wouldn't mention that. And that's what we want to do. We want you as journalists to show solidarity with your journalism friends back in Turkey, and really show Turkey that there is international pressure. We would use people like you. We would go to international organizations and really try to put international pressure on Turkey to redress the situation. So we wanted to ask you if you can help us take a collective picture with us holding the signs, and also if you can tweet it yourself, if you want to take selfies and tweet it with this hashtag. So yeah, if you want to stand up and let's do the picture together, let's show Turkey that we care about freedom of expression.
Well, our picture will not be there. It's great. Another one?
Well, thank you so much for the solidarity.
Thank you very much for joining us, and have a good evening.
Well done. Good.
You should take some and give it to people.
Oh, you here? Yeah, we recently ran off and then we were still talking.
There was a guy from the Berlin Morgenpost who wanted to do an interview about
That's perfect. Berlin is perfect. Yeah.
I need a drink.
Ooh. Yeah.
Just saying.
I think I'm gonna keep this out and then I'm ready.
Oh yeah, you get a picture.
Volevo fare delle domande se era possibile.
Like that.
Io sono di Global Project.
I want to say hello to this guy.
Ciao Antonio, piacere.
That was good, well done. Bravo, bravo.
What about conventional media and what happened to, in various dimensions, to the conventional media, and what is the latest, which will be followed up by Marta, who will be giving you the snapshots of what's been happening recently with the foreign press in Turkey. And Efe will conclude with what's been happening with the social media, new media, oppression on that. So, Gülsin, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Yavuz. So first, I would like to state with a suggestion. I would like to propose a twist on the name of the panel. Instead of black hole, I would suggest to use the word limbo. Turkey now is a big black limbo for the journalists, both international and Turkish journalists. I'm saying a limbo, and I want to make my case with a very concrete example. Exactly a year ago, Kadri Gürsel, that Yavuz so kindly mentioned, he was on this table.
Expect in other parts of the world. It has always been like that in the past 4 or 5 years. And here I am together with 3 distinguished guests, colleagues of mine, to discuss various dimensions of that. And I will give each and every one of them like 8 minutes to introduce those dimensions. And we will follow up with the Q&A with your questions about that. And I'll begin introducing the gentleman on my right, Efe Kerem Sözleri. And he wants to be introduced only like a freelance journalist, but he's an academician as well. That's a secret that I want to share with you. And he's based in Amsterdam for a long time, and following keenly the situation in Turkey on hourly basis, minute basis actually. And on my left, freshly arrived from Turkey with the latest updates, my young colleague, Gülsin Harman, whom I've known for a long time, currently with the International Press Institute, Turkish office. Of course, was in many ways a severe blow for whatever remained of the fragile democratic order of Turkey. Now we are in the midst of a very sort of a follow-up, a dramatic conclusion, resolution of that process with vast consequences of purge. Again, cruelty unimaginable to targeting our profession, and with an unknown series of consequences. No matter if yes or no vote wins next Sunday's 16th of April referendum. And we are going to discuss the dimension of where we are, because in many ways, what happened in Turkey as a sort of laboratorium of rapidly emerging authoritarianism in the world is exemplary of what is to come and what is to...
Made a speech about the current state of the Turkish journalism, and by describing it, he said, they are not killing journalists anymore, a reference to the 90s, but they are killing journalism. So, where is he now? One may tell you that he is in prison for more than 152 days. His indictment is out only 2 days ago, with completely bogus claims and absurd charges. But the fact that he is in prison, I would interpret this as he's been in limbo, because as his case is purely political, his release and the further implications on his case depend totally on the political circumstances in Turkey. So a few months ago, he gave a quote through his wife to New York Times, because his wife is the only person allowed to see him so far. And he said this: "I am a captive hostage for the upcoming presidential referendum." Because the voice of a very
damaged Turkish office, I would say, because one of our dearest friends, whom I've known for over 3 decades, the head of the IPI Turkey, also part of the executive board of the International Press Institute, Kadri Gürsel, has been incarcerated for more than 152 days. He was here in Umbria, Journalism Festival, last year, if I'm not mistaken, but he's now behind bars. And finally, Marta Ottaviani, my dear colleague, who is the author of Il Reis, a portrait of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Turkish president. Of course, a moving target. This book may be needing a lot of powerful updates in about 6 months, I don't know. And Marta, welcome also. We'll begin with Gülsin, because Gülsin will, I suppose, speak more about